Okay, think about your kitchen pantry for a second. It's, where we keep our staples, the things we cook with every day. And often, it's where we store those products we pay a bit extra for, maybe thinking, okay, this is better for me, healthier. But today, we're diving into something pretty shocking, a huge global issue that might be hiding right there on your shelf. Get this. You pay, say, $20 for a bottle of fancy Italian extra virgin olive oil. You think you're doing your heart a favor, right? Getting that pure liquid gold. But what if I told you there's actually a really high chance, statistically speaking, that what you actually bought is, well, a cheap blend, maybe from Tunisia, maybe diluted with other oils, and maybe even artificially colored with chlorophyll just to get that rich green look.
Yeah, and that's not just being paranoid. It's
No.
it's the calculated reality of the global food market today. So our mission in this deep dive is really to pull back the curtain on some of the most common ways food gets faked. We want to look at the huge financial engine driving these crimes, and most importantly, we want to give you, the listener, the tools you need, like the forensic tools to protect your plate, your health, and yeah, your wallet from what people are calling the kitchen counterfeit crisis.
Okay, so let's be super clear about what we're talking about here. This isn't about like accidents in the factory, a bit of plastic falling in, or bad hygiene. That's food safety, different issue. We are talking about food fraud. That's the intentional, deliberate deception of you, the consumer. Usually it involves swapping ingredients, watering things down, or just straight up lying about what's in the package. And it's almost always about money, profit. That's why the regulators have a formal name for it, economically motivated adulteration, or EMA, EMNA.
And the sheer scale of the motive, it's kind of mind-boggling. The global food market,
Yeah.
we're talking over $6,000 billion in revenue every year. That kind of money. It creates this huge, almost irresistible temptation for criminals to exploit these really complex supply chains we have now. And they're smart about it. They develop these sophisticated techniques to get around the usual quality checks. If you look historically, it's always the high-value stuff, isn't it? Things that are heavily processed or imported from far away, they're the main targets. And year after year, you see the same offenders on the list. Extra virgin olive oil, definitely. Honey. Fancy cheeses. Meat. Fish. Okay, let's unpack that. Starting with, well, the king of the counterfeits, you called it. The one with the highest fraud rate globally. Let's talk about that liquid gold crisis. Extra virgin olive oil. Why EVOO? Why is it such a massive target? Well, its vulnerability is sort of multi-layered. First, obviously, commands a high price. People expect to pay more for good EVOO because of its quality. But, and this is crucial, the way it's made is actually quite minimal. To get that extra virgin label, the oil has to be extracted only by mechanical means. Cold pressing. That's it.
No heat, no chemicals.
Exactly. It's literally just the fresh fruit juice of the olive. And because that process is so simple, it preserves all those distinct flavors, the fruitiness, that little bit of bitterness, and really importantly, the polyphenols.
Ah, the healthy stuff.
The healthy stuff, the antioxidants everyone talks about. Now, the profit margin between that premium fresh-pressed oil and just a generic mass-produced seed oil, it's huge. So swapping them or blending them becomes incredibly lucrative.
So what are the fraudsters actually doing? I guess the simplest thing is just dilution, right? Cutting the good stuff with something cheaper.
Dilution is definitely step one. It's the foundation of the scam. They take real EVOO and they cut it or stretch it maybe with lower grades of olive oil that didn't quite meet the standard. Or, more often, they mix it with much cheaper seed oils.
Like what?
Oh, rapeseed, sunflower, corn oil. Sometimes even things like avocado or hazelnut oil. Hazelnut's actually a tricky one because its fatty acid profile can look quite similar to olive oil, especially in smaller amounts. Makes it harder to detect with the basic tests.
But wait, those seed oils, they're usually pale, right? Almost clear sometimes. That doesn't look like the rich green or golden EVOO people expect. So how do they get around that? This is where the coloring trick you mentioned comes in.
Exactly. And it's genuinely brilliant in a really deceitful way. It's psychological. We as consumers have this deep-seated cultural idea that rich, deep green equals high-quality, fresh olive oil.
Yeah, totally.
Fraudsters know this. They know that color isn't actually a reliable sign of quality, but they also know we rely on it. So they deliberately color those cheap, clear seed oils. They use common food additives. Chlorophyll gives it that deep green.
Like from plants?
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe some carotenoids like beta-carotene or other dyes for a bit of a yellow tint. They mix up this concoction that perfectly mimics how we think good EVO should look.
And we're not talking about small-time operations here, are we? Like a couple of guys in a garage.
Oh, no, not at all. This is organized. Think about Operation Parmesan 8th back in 2019. It was a big international operation, Europol, Italian authorities. They seized something like 150,000 liters of fake olive oil.
150,000 liters.
And this wasn't just slightly dodgy olive oil. It was basically sunflower oil, colored with chlorophyll, beta-carotene, and some soybean oil thrown in. They created a fake product, visually perfect, and were marketing it as premium Italian export. The scale of that bust really shows you the level of organized crime involved.
Wow, so that's using oils that aren't even olive oil. But you also mentioned lampante oil being used. What exactly is that, and why is it bad if it ends up in my EV
Right,
unit?
lampante oil. That's a different kind of fraud, but just as serious. Historically, lampante just means for the lamp. It was oil that wasn't good enough to eat, only good enough for fuel.
Literally lamp oil.
Basically, yeah. It is technically virgin olive oil, but it fails the official quality tests, usually because it has really bad flavor defects. And crucially, its acidity is way too high. Remember, for an oil to be called extra virgin, its acidity measured as oleic acid has to be below 0.8 grams per 100 grams. Lampante oil might be over 2, 3, even 4 grams.
Okay, so much higher. What does that mean for taste?
High acidity means the oil is really oxidized. It often tastes rancid or really bitter, maybe vinegary. It's just unpleasant. It's completely unfit to eat directly. You have to chemically refine it first, which strips out all the flavor and the good stuff anyway. So fraudsters mix this cheap, nasty lampante oil into batches of decent EVOO just to bulk up the volume and make more profit. But it degrades the taste and quality of the whole lot.
Okay, so we've got dilution, coloring tricks, using lampante oil, but there's another layer, isn't there? The label itself, where it says the oil is from. I mean, I always look for product of Italy or Spain, thinking that means quality. Is that reliable?
Unfortunately. No, not always. Geographical mislabeling is incredibly common. A bottle might say, product of Italy, but the olives, or maybe the crude oil itself, could have actually come from cheaper places like Tunisia or Morocco or Turkey.
So they import it cheap?
Exactly. They bring in this lower-cost oil, maybe just sits in a port for a short time or gets minimal processing. Investigators call it a short stay in the port, and then boom, it gets re-exported with a label saying product of Italy or product of Spain.
Cool.
You, the consumer, end up paying a premium price because you trust that label. But what you're actually getting is this cheap, complex blend from somewhere else entirely. There was a big case in 2018 with a major Spanish cooperative caught doing exactly this, shipping low-quality blends disguised as virgin olive oil to the U.S. It happens even with big players.
And this is where things get really, really current and, frankly, a bit scary. The incentive for this fraud is being supercharged by climate change, the droughts in the Mediterranean.
Absolutely. It's a direct link. Climate change is hitting the Mediterranean basin hard. That's where nearly 90% of the world's EVO comes from. We're seeing these extreme long droughts that have just decimated olive harvests.
So less supply.
Less supply means prices skyrocket. We've gone from maybe historically €3 to €5 a liter for EVOO to routinely seeing €10, €12, even higher now.
Wow, that's a huge jump.
It is. And that massive price gap, that's the catalyst. It creates what the industry calls an attractive fraud opportunity. It makes it incredibly profitable for criminal gangs to flood the market, a market that's desperate for oil with cheap fakes, which of course makes things even worse for the legitimate farmers who are already struggling with the drought.
Okay, this is a lot. So I'm standing in the supermarket aisle. I'm looking at all these bottles, all these prices. I'm feeling overwhelmed. How do I actually find the real deal? We need a practical checklist, something we can actually use.
Right.
The first thing is maybe a mental shift. You need to start thinking of EVOO, like what it really is. The fresh fruit juice of olives. It's perishable. Its quality doesn't last forever. Fruit juice of olives. I like that. Okay, step 1 on the checklist, the grade. What should the label say?
Only buy bottles labeled extra virgin olive oil. Avoid anything that just says virgin olive oil or refined olive oil or simply olive oil. Those usually mean it's been chemically treated or heated, and that destroys the health benefits and the flavor.
Got it. Extra virgin only. Step 2, the container. Seems simple, but you said it's critical. It has to be dark glass. Or maybe a tin, but dark glass is best. Light is the enemy of olive oil, especially those polyphenols. It breaks them down, makes the oil go rancid faster. Dark glass blocks most of the light.
And avoid plastic. Yeah, definitely avoid those big, clear plastic jugs. Over time, chemicals from the plastic can leach into the oil. Not good for taste, not good for health. Stick to dark glass. Okay, step 3. How is it made? The processing method. Look for the words cold pressed or cold extracted on the label, and it should confirm it was done using only mechanical means. If you see any mention of heat processing or chemical solvents, put it back. That's not high-quality EVOO.
Acidity. You said this is a key scientific marker.
This is like the hidden gem on the label. Look for the acidity level, usually listed as oleic acid. Remember, the rule for EVOO is it must be below 0.8 grams per 100 grams, or 0.8%.
Lower is better.
Much better. The really high-quality producers, they're proud of their low acidity. They'll often list it right there, aiming for maybe 0.25% to 0.40%. If you can't find the acidity listed anywhere on the bottle, that's often a sign they might be hiding something, maybe an oil that just barely scraped by the 0.8% limit. Okay, super useful. Step 5, origin, and importantly, the date. This helps fight that geographical trickery, right? Yes, demand traceability. Look for a single country of origin. Even better if it lists a specific region within that country. But the single most important date on the bottle is the harvest date.
Not the best buy date.
The harvest date. The best buy date can be kind of arbitrary, often set 2 years after bottling, not harvesting. EVOO is best within 12, maybe 18 months after the olives were picked. So look for that harvest date. If it's missing or if it's more than 2 years ago, probably best to avoid it. And look for signs of transparency. Some good brands now have QR codes you can scan or batch numbers for tracking. That's a good sign.
Right.
And finally, step 6, those official-looking seals. Yeah, look for the European Union seals if you can find them. PDO, that's Protected Designation of Origin, or PGI, Protected Geographical Indication. These aren't just marketing fluff. They are legal guarantees that the olives were grown and the oil was made in a specific place using specific approved methods. They mean something.
Okay, so you followed the checklist, you've bought your bottle,
Yeah.
you get it home, you said forget the color. What should real good EVOO taste and smell like?
Forget the color, exactly. That's what the fakers want you to focus on. Real EVOO should smell fruity, maybe grassy, like fresh-cut grass sometimes. When you taste it, you should get some bitterness, maybe on the middle of your tongue. And crucially, this is the telltale sign. A slight peppery kick or burning sensation right at the back of your throat after you swallow.
That little cough.
That'll cough. That's the polyphenols, the antioxidants doing their thing. That's a sign of quality.
Yeah.
If the oil tastes bland or greasy or just sort of flat, or if it smells like crayons or wax, it's likely old, refined, or heavily diluted.
Okay, that is super helpful for olive oil. Let's switch gears now. From liquid gold to liquid sweetness, honey, another premium product, right? Often with labels saying 100% pure natural honey, but I'm guessing the reality is, well, stickier.
Yeah, definitely stickier. Honey is another prime target. And again, it's because of that huge gap between how much it costs to produce real honey and how cheap the substitutes are. Pure honey takes a massive amount of work from the bees, obviously, but also from the beekeepers.
So how big is the financial incentive here? What's the profit margin for the fraudsters?
It's enormous. Let's look at EU import figures from 2021. The average value of imported honey was about 2.32 per kilogram. Okay. Now, compare that to industrial rice sugar syrup, which is a favorite adulterant these days that costs maybe 0.40 to 0.60 per kilogram.
Wow, okay. Pennies compared to euros.
Exactly. So if you can mix cheap syrup into honey, maybe even mostly syrup, and sell it at the price of pure honey, you're looking at profit margins of 500%, maybe much more. And often, the risk of getting caught hasn't been that high historically.
We used to hear about honey being cut with corn syrup. Simple stuff. But it sounds like the fraudsters have gotten way more sophisticated now, even trying to outsmart the labs.
This is where it gets kind of scary, the level of innovation in fraud. Yeah, the old method was just adding high fructose corn syrup or basic cane sugar. But labs got good at detecting that using a technique called carbon isotope testing, or IRMS. It could tell if the sugars came from corn or cane instead of flowers.
So the fraudsters adapted?
They did. Now, they often commission custom-made syrups. These aren't just off-the-shelf sweeteners. They're complex syrups, maybe made from rice or wheat or sugar beet, and they're specifically engineered so that their sugar profile, the ratio of fructose to glucose, etc., chemically mimics real honey.
So they look like honey to the basic tests.
Exactly. They're designed to fool those initial IRMS tests. It forces regulators and honest companies to use much more advanced and expensive techniques like NMR spectroscopy to be really sure. It's like food science being weaponized for fraud.
Wow. So beyond just adding fake sugars, what other kinds of honey scams are out there?
Oh, there are several. Mislabeling the origin is a big one. Selling a cheap blend of honey from all over the world, but labeling it as a high-value single-flower honey, like Manuka from New Zealand or maybe acacia honey.
Right, charging a premium for something that isn't what it claims to be.
Exactly. Then there's something called ultrafiltration. This process strips out all the pollen from the honey. Why does that matter? Because pollen is like the honey's fingerprint. It's the main way scientists can tell which flowers the bees visited and therefore where the honey came from. Remove the pollen, and the honey becomes basically untraceable.
Snaky.
Very. And finally, there's illegal feeding. Some beekeepers will feed their bees cheap sugar syrup during the nectar flow season, when the flowers are actually blooming. It just artificially boosts the volume of honey they collect, but it dilutes the real nectar.
Okay, so the scale of this. You mentioned some stats earlier that sounded pretty bad, especially for imported honey.
The data really does paint a picture of a crisis of trust. During the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, reported fraud incidents involving honey and sweeteners jumped by something like 800%. Criminals clearly exploited the chaos in supply chains.
800%.
Yeah. But maybe the most telling figures came from a big EU-coordinated testing effort between late 2021 and early 2022. They tested 320 batches of honey imported into the EU from various countries. The result? A shocking 46% of those batches were flagged as suspicious of being adulterated with added sugars.
46%, nearly half.
Nearly half of imported honey consignments tested were potentially fake or non-compliant. That's a massive breakdown in consumer confidence, isn't it?
It absolutely is. So if nearly half might be dodgy, and the really definitive tests, like that NMR thing you mentioned, nuclear magnetic resonance, right? If that's needed for full certainty, what can regular people like us do at home? Are there any simple tests? Okay, so we need to be clear. These home tests aren't foolproof, scientific proof like lab analysis, but they can give you some pretty strong clues, especially about dilution with watery syrups. First one, the water test.
Okay, what do I do? Take a glass of room temperature water. Get a spoonful of your honey. Now, drop the honey into the water. Real, pure honey is very dense, very thick, because it has low moisture. It should sink straight to the bottom, pretty much intact. It will dissolve eventually, but really slowly.
And fake honey.
Fake honey, especially if it's cut with thin syrups that contain more water, will start to dissolve much more quickly. You might see it dispersing in the water almost immediately, maybe forming cloudy trails as it goes down.
Ah, okay. That's a clear visual difference. What about the flame test? That sounds interesting. The flame test is all about moisture content. Pure honey has naturally low moisture, which actually makes it slightly flammable. So the test is dip the head of a dry matchstick into the honey, then try to light the matchstick. And
If it's real low moisture honey, the match should light, maybe sputter a bit, but it will light. If the honey is fake and diluted with water-based syrup, the high moisture content will likely prevent the match from igniting at all. It might just sizzle.
Okay, water test, flame test. What about how the honey behaves over time? Texture.
Yes, this is a really important natural indicator. Crystallization. It's that process where honey gets thick, grainy, sometimes almost solid. It happens naturally in almost all real honey because of the high glucose content relative to fructose in water.
So crystallization is actually a good sign.
It's a great sign. It shows the honey is natural and hasn't been overly processed. If you have a jar of honey that stays perfectly clear, perfectly liquid, totally smooth for months and months on end, that's actually a bit of a red flag.
Why?
It likely means it's either been heavily processed, maybe pasteurized at high heat, which damages it, or more likely it's been adulterated with syrups like corn syrup or rice syrup, which are designed not to crystallize, specifically to make the product look better on the shelf for longer.
Got it. So embrace the crystal. And back to the label again, what are the immediate red flags there?
Check the ingredients list. It should be your best friend. If it's pure honey, it should list exactly one ingredient. Honey, that's it.
What if it lists other things?
If you see anything else listed, glucose, fructose, sucrose, corn syrup, even vague things like sugar syrup or flavorings, put it straight back on the shelf. That's not pure honey.
In the origin.
Be really wary of vague origins like blend of EU and non-EU honey or blend of imported and domestic honey. That's often code for we mixed in cheap stuff from who knows where. Ideally, look for honey that names a specific floral source like clover honey or orange blossom honey, or even better, honey from a local beekeeper where you can actually talk to the person who produced it. Okay, excellent advice for honey. Let's pivot again. From the liquids, oil, and honey to something solid, aged, and well revered. The king of cheese. Parmigiano Reggiano. It's got such a strong identity, such protection. Surely it's safe. You'd think so, wouldn't you? Parmigiano Reggiano is probably one of the best examples of a food product trying desperately to protect itself from fraud. But the very fact that it's so revered, so valuable, makes it a huge target. We need to distinguish first, especially for listeners in the U.S. Generic Parmesan, often sold pre-grated in tubs, is basically an unregulated term in many places. It can mean anything. True Parmigiano Reggiano, however, is like champagne. It's fiercely protected by European law under the DOP rules Denominazione di Origine Protetta, or Protected Designation of Origin.
DOP. Okay, so what does that actually guarantee? What makes real Parmigiano Reggiano special, and what are the fraudsters trying to fake or bypass? The DOP rules are incredibly strict, and they all tie back to the unique terroir of a specific region in Italy. First, the cheese must come from one of only 5 provinces: Parma, Reggio Emilia, Modena, parts of Bologna, and parts of Mantua. Nowhere else. Okay, specific location, what else? Only 3 ingredients are allowed: local milk, salt, and calf rennet. That's it. And the milk is key. It has to come from cows fed only on locally grown forage from that designated region. No fermented feeds, no silage. This diet gives the milk a unique microbial profile, which translates directly into the cheese's flavor. Wow, down to the cow's dinner.
Absolutely. And then there's the aging. It must be aged for a minimum of 12 months, but most wheels you find are aged for 24, even 36 months or longer. That long, slow aging develops the complex, nutty, umami flavor, those little crunchy white spots. Those are amino acid crystals, a sign of perfect aging.
Okay, the quality is clearly on another level, but where does the fraud come in? It seems like the biggest risk is with the pre-graded stuff, right? This brings us to the whole cellulose controversy.
Yes, the grated cheese risk is where things get really problematic. Many people have probably seen powdered cellulose listed as an ingredient on tubs of pre-shredded Parmesan. Now, technically, cellulose, which often comes from wood pulp, is a legal additive. It's used as an anti-caking agent to stop the shreds sticking together.
Okay, so it's allowed,
But its presence is often a huge red flag for dilution, because it's much easier to hide cheap fillers in grated cheese than in a solid wedge. Some manufacturers have been caught using way more cellulose than necessary, essentially using it as a cheap filler to bulk up the volume. And worse, sometimes they substitute the expensive milk fat, the very heart of cheese, with much cheaper vegetable oils and fats. They create what's called analog cheese.
analog cheese, like fake cheese.
Pretty much. It's designed to look like cheese, melt like cheese, maybe even feel a bit like cheese, but it's nutritionally completely different. It lacks the protein and calcium of real dairy cheese. When you buy pre-shredded, it's just far too easy for dishonest producers to mix real cheese with this cheaper analog stuff, or pad it out with excess fillers like cellulose.
And sometimes these substitutions are just blatant, aren't they?
They can be incredibly brazen.
Yeah.
You mentioned a UK case. Trading standards officers there investigated takeaway pizzas advertised as having cheese and ham. What they found was that on several samples, the dairy cheese had been completely replaced with analog cheese. Customers were paying for cheese but getting a synthetic imitation. It's not just about getting less nutrition, it's a fundamental deception. So the message is, be very wary of pre-grated Parmesan. If we want the real deal, the DOP king of cheese, and we're buying a wedge, how can we be sure it's authentic? Luckily, the official Parmigiano Reggiano Consortium has built some really good security features right into the cheese itself, primarily on the rind. These are hard to fake. First, look for the rind stamps.
What do they look like?
During production, the words Parmigiano Reggiano are stamped repeatedly in a pattern of pin dots all around the circumference of the hard outer rind. You should be able to see this dotted lettering clearly on the rind of any authentic wedge.
Okay, look for the dots. What else?
Each wheel also gets marked with a unique alphanumeric code, kind of like a serial number, and it will have the official DOP logo burned or stamped onto it. So when you buy a wedge, make sure you can see a portion of that rind with the dotted lettering. Don't buy wedges where the rind has been completely cut off.
It's amazing how much protection it has, yet the fake market is still huge, apparently.
It's estimated that the global market for fake Parmesan is worth around $2 billion a year. That's almost as much as the sales of the genuine article. The demand is just so high globally.
So what else are they doing to fight back?
Well, faced with this massive fraud, the consortium got really high-tech in 2022. They started embedding tiny, food-safe silicon microchips, they call them P-chips, directly onto the casein label on the rind of the cheese wheel.
Microchips on cheese.
Yep, tiny little things. And they combine this with QR codes. It allows for secure blockchain-based tracking and authentication right to the supply chain. The idea is you could eventually scan the cheese in the store and instantly verify its entire history and confirm it's genuine.
Wow. That's quite a blend of ancient cheese-making tradition and cutting-edge tech.
It really shows you the lengths they have to go to, which underscores just how big the incentive for fraud must be. Okay, incredible. Let's move to our final category, seafood. When we think about fish, maybe we worry about mercury or sustainability, overfishing. But food fraud, that adds a whole other layer of risk, doesn't it? Especially for health.
Absolutely. Fish fraud is primarily a problem of mislabeling. It's swapping one species for another. Usually selling a cheap, abundant fish as a more expensive, desirable one. Or maybe passing off farmed fish as premium wild caught. Or just substituting whatever's available when the popular fish is out of season. And this doesn't just cheat you financially, it undermines conservation efforts, and as you said, it poses real health risks. How widespread is this? What do the studies show, particularly somewhere like North America?
The numbers are pretty disturbing, honestly. Oceana, the Ocean Conservation Group, has done extensive DNA testing studies. In the U.S., they consistently found that about 21%, that's roughly 1 in every 5 fish samples they tested from restaurants and retailers, was mislabeled.
1 in 5.
And in Canada, their studies over several years found mislabeling rates hitting between 44% and 46%. That's almost half the fish tested in some Canadian cities being sold as something they weren't.
46%, that's staggering. But hang on, I often see government reports, maybe from the CFIA in Canada, quoting much lower fraud rates, sometimes down in the single digits, like 8%. Why such a huge difference between Oceana's findings and the official figures?
Yes. This discrepancy is really important for people to understand because it often comes down to what I call the restaurant loophole.
The restaurant loop.
Yeah. Oceana's studies consistently found that restaurants and the food service industry were the biggest offenders. In some of their studies, more than half the fish samples taken from restaurants were mislabeled. But the government studies, like the CFIA ones you mentioned, they often specifically excluded restaurants from their testing samples. They focused mainly on grocery stores and processing plants.
So, by leaving out the sector where the fraud is most common, the place where the consumer has the least information, frankly, the official studies end up showing a much lower and potentially misleadingly optimistic fraud rate.
That's exactly it. Oceana's rate in retail stores was lower, maybe closer to 22% in the U.S., which is still bad.
Yeah.
But if you want a true picture of the risk across the entire food system, especially when you eat out, you have to include restaurants. Ignoring them creates this massive blind spot for consumers.
Okay, that makes sense. So, beyond getting ripped off paying snapper prices for tilefish, say, what are the specific health risks we need to worry about with fish substitution?
The health risks are serious, and they range from mild discomfort to potentially life-threatening. Firstly, if a fish is substituted, you often have no idea where the replacement fish came from, how it was handled, or how it was stored. This lack of traceability increases the risk of food poisoning from bacterial contamination or histamine buildup if it wasn't kept properly cold.
And allergies?
That's the big one. Fish and shellfish are major allergens. If someone has a known allergy to, say, cod, but they're served escolar mislabeled as cod, they could have a severe, unexpected, and potentially fatal allergic reaction. The substitution completely bypasses their careful avoidance strategies.
Can you give some examples of common risky substitutions people should know about?
Sure. One of the most notorious is selling a fish called escolar as white tuna, or sometimes even butterfish. Escolar is cheap, but it contains high levels of natural wax esters that humans can't digest properly. For many people, eating even a small amount can cause, well, unpleasant gastrointestinal effects. Stomach cramps, oily diarrhea. It's sometimes called the laxative fish.
Okay, definitely want to avoid the laxative fish. What else?
Another common one is substituting tilefish for red snapper, especially when snapper is expensive or scarce. Tilefish, particularly those caught in certain areas like the Gulf of Mexico, can accumulate higher levels of mercury than red snapper. This poses an unnecessary risk, especially for vulnerable groups like pregnant women or young children who are advised to limit mercury intake. So we've covered the big ones. EVO getting diluted and colored, honey being cut with engineered syrups, Parmesan getting padded with cellulose or replaced by analog cheese, and widespread fish species swapping. Let's try to pull this all together. Why is this happening on such a massive scale, and what are the absolute essential takeaways for us, the consumers, to defend ourselves? Okay, the why comes back to that term. EMA, economically motivated adulteration. It's deliberate, it's for profit, and it thrives in our modern global food system for two main reasons. One, the price difference between the real thing and the fake substitute is often huge, creating that massive profit incentive we talked about with oil and honey.
That supply chains are now so long, so complex, spanning multiple countries and handlers, that it makes it really hard to track everything. The chances of getting caught might seem low, or the really good detection tests are too expensive to use on every single batch. That complexity provides cover for the fraudsters. Right. So given that reality, what are the simple, practical rules we can all use, distilled from everything we've discussed? Rule number one seems to be the label, but really read the label.
Yes. Read the entire label front and back critically. Don't just trust the pretty picture or the claims in the front. Go straight to the ingredients list. Is it just honey? Does the EVO state cold press list a low acidity and crucially show a harvest date? Look for those official seals, PDO, PGI, DOP, that signify genuine oversight. Okay, rule number two, buy whole foods whenever you can. This came up again and again. It's probably the single best defense. It's just fundamentally harder to fake a whole product. Buy the wedge of Parmigiano Reggiano with the rind stamps, not the pre-shredded tub. Buy whole fish if possible, or get it filleted at a counter where you trust the fishmonger, rather than buying anonymous prepackaged fillets. Whole foods have built-in traceability that processed foods often lack. Rule number three, the price tag. If it seems too good to be true, it almost certainly is. Question suspiciously low prices aggressively. Real high-quality products, genuine EVOO, DOP cheese, Manuka honey, wild salmon cost more to produce for legitimate reasons related to origin, quality control, labor, and time. If you see something that's usually expensive being sold incredibly cheaply, that low price is probably being subsidized by fraud, dilution, substitution, mislabeling. Authenticity has a cost. Makes sense. And rule number four, demand transparency and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Exactly.
Yes. Support brands and stores that are transparent about their sourcing. Look for specifics, the farm, the region, the harvest date, the floral source for honey, and especially at the fish counter or in restaurants. Ask, what species is this exactly? Where was it caught? When? How? If they can't give you clear, confident answers, maybe choose something else on the menu that seems more traceable. Your questions signal that consumers care about authenticity.
This whole deep dive, it's really opened my eyes not just to the scale of food fraud, but also the sheer cleverness, the ingenuity of the criminals involved.
It really has, hasn't it? We've seen everything from basic dilution and coloring tricks in olive oil to sophisticated molecular mimicry with honey syrups, the battle between tradition and microchips to protect cheese, and the blatant species swapping in seafood that risks our health. The big takeaway: our complex global food system creates endless opportunities for fraud, and it demands constant, educated vigilance from all of us.
And fighting back isn't just about getting what we paid for, is it? It's bigger than that.
Much bigger. It's about basic market fairness. It's about protecting the honest farmers and producers who do follow the rules and strive for quality. And fundamentally, it's about maintaining trust in the food on our plates, trust in the entire system.
So we've heard regulators and scientists are using these incredibly advanced tools, isotope analysis, DNA testing, now even microchips on cheese.
Right, cutting-edge stuff, just to try and keep up with the fraudsters.
So here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If the industry and regulators need technology that advanced just to fight fraud at the production and import level, what role should technology play for us? Should there be, say, mandatory, easily accessible blockchain traceability, something you could check with a simple scan on your phone for all premium food products to bring real, verifiable transparency right into your own kitchen?